treat. Pastor is not here this evening, but you are in for a special treat. We've watched this young man go through Shiloh. God transformed his life, and you're going to hear an awesome testimony. And so if you would put your hands together tonight for Aaron, and I never say his last name, I put an R in it every time, Dupuis. So Aaron, come on up and minister the word. Amen. Love you.
All right. So I'm going to warn y'all, I pace a lot when I talk, so y'all just try to follow me the best you can. I get excited, and I just can't help it. So I'm going to kind of give my testimony, but I also kind of want to preach about identity a little bit, because I think identity is one of the most important things to understand when you first get saved is who you are in Christ. Not your calling, but your identity, because there's a big difference between the two. So if you guys would, open up to Colossians chapter 4, please. While y'all do that, I got a fun little story for y'all. When I was 21, Galatians 4, I was wrong. I was just seeing if y'all are paying attention or not. When I was 21, I went to my first rehab ever. It was January 17th, 2015. And I remember my mom, bless her soul, putting up with everything I had put her through. And right before they take me into the back part of the rehab where, the family can't be there anymore and I'm officially like a patient there, the last thing she tells me is, you need to find out who you are. She said, you're 21 years old and you have no idea who you are. She said, not what you want to do with your life, not any of that, but who Aaron is. And throughout the rest of my time of being a heathen, that always stuck with me was figuring out who I am. And of course, when I got to Shiloh, I obviously figured out that I'm a son of God. And so that leads me over to Galatians chapter 4, and I'm going to start in verse 1. And it says that, I mean the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Man, doesn't that just feel good to hear? To just say that, like, I am an heir to the throne of Christ. Like, how cool is that? So the definition of identity in English is the fact of being who or what a thing is, a close similarity or affinity. And in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, it talks about how we are made in God's image. We are made in his likeness. We have that affinity with God. We aren't made to be the same person. God makes everyone with different quirks, different characteristics, different personalities and things like that. And so I was a weird kid growing up. Like, I'll just get that out of the way before I get really deep into this testimony. Like, I was that punk rock skater kid that you were like, please don't hang out with him. He's gonna corrupt you. And you were right, I was going to corrupt you. But, I grew up in a little town called Lake Arthur, Louisiana. And I mean, like, maybe 3,000 people max. It was a tiny town, I grew up Catholic, and did I just hear someone groan? God. I grew up Catholic, and, we wouldn't really go to church, though. We were like the Easter, Christmas Catholics. And I personally, when I was younger, was okay with that because, I thought I had more important things to do than go to church. And so time goes on. I'm about 15 years old. My parents divorced when I was about 2, and my real dad kind of just was in and out for the remainder of up to this point in my life. And my mom remarried when I was 5 or 6, and my stepdad stepped in and was the father that I didn't have, and he was my father figure. And I say that because he wasn't just a dad, because any man could have been a dad, but he was an actual father. And he came in and he filled that void for me and my sister. And so I didn't like him when I was younger because I didn't understand his role. It wasn't until I was much older that I appreciated what he did for me. And so I'm 15, and I decided I don't believe in God at all anymore. I don't want to do church. I'm done with that. I don't have time for that. This is around the time that I start like skateboarding, and I've learned to play some instruments. So me and my friends are starting some bands. We think we were so cool, And so obviously, what do kids who skateboard and play music do? Well, they smoke pot. So, if I wanted to be in, well, I had to smoke pot. And so 15, I start smoking pot. Everything's cool. I think I'm living my best life. I'm making F's and D's in school because I didn't care about school. The only thing that I cared about, there were two subjects I cared about in high school, and it was English and band. Obviously, I play drums in here every now and again. I like to make a lot of noise. It's one of my favorite things to do. That sprouted from that time period in my life. But I was really good at English. I'm really good at writing. I like to write a lot. And so in English, I always enjoyed that. The rest of the classes were kind of like, if you would look at my report cards, it's like all across English is A's. Everything else is like F, C, D, F. My mom's like, I don't understand. And of course, marching band, it's really not hard to make an A in band. You just kind of show up and participate. But, when I was 16, and this also played a big role in my life, was we got a new band director at our high school. His name was David Landry. He's somewhere in Texas now, actually. But he was a 3-time state champion in Texas. And so when he came, we were like the worst band in the state, hands down. Like, we were the band that everyone made fun of. And he comes and he turns us into a state championship band in like 3 years. And so one thing I learned through that is authority and how to respond to authority and how to do as I'm told and how to be self-accountable and how to be responsible for myself and make sure I take care of the things I needed to take care of. And at this time period in my life, my partying and my the addiction that I had hadn't quite kicked in to full swing yet. I was still kind of this high school weekend warrior, smoke some pot here, drink there, and as long as mom and dad don't find out, everything's going to be cool. And so I go through high school. I graduated in a class of 60 people. I graduated 51st out of 60 in my class. I graduated with a 2.3 GPA. And somehow, I still went to college. The first time I told my testimony and said that, there was this lady, and she was like, wow, I can't believe that. They let you in? I'm like, yes, ma'am. But I go to college. I was 17 when I graduated. I wasn't even 18 yet. I couldn't even get into the clubs when I was in college. Like, what was the point of being in college is what I thought. But I made it. I went to McNeese State, and I was in the marching band there as well, and I was on the drum line. And while I was there, I made connections and I met people. And throughout the next few years of my life, my profession became music. I began playing music, and that's how I made my money. And I got to do all kind of cool things and go all kind of cool places, and that was really awesome. And I thought I was living my dream because my dream had always been to be in a band and tour the world and just do it with some of my best friends. That was like every skater kid's dream, and I was going to do it. And so I'm doing these things, but I still really don't know who I am at this time. Like, in high school, I wore whatever hat was necessary to fit in with the situation I was in. If I needed to hang out with the football players, well, I put on that hat. And then over here, we have my band kid friends, and so I put that hat on and I come hang out with them. And then over here, we kind of got the like in-between people that aren't really sure what they're doing. And that was really easy because I just had to pretend I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm really good at that. And it's not pretending, but I like to wing it. That's like my life motto, just wing it. And so I'm not really sure who I am at the time, and I go off and I start doing all these things. At this time, I had tried a lot of drugs, but at this time I was introduced to heroin, and that became a vice in my life for the next 4 or 5 years. 4, if my math's right. I was bad at math in high school, so forgive me. But that kind of became a vice in my life. And so I would go through these periods where I would use, and I would just use so much of it, and then I would get so tired of it, and I would try something new to get myself away from it. Y'all, I tried everything. I'm going to say this in a church in Texas, and please don't stone me to death. I was a vegan. I tried Buddhism. I tried Hinduism. I tried all these different religions. I went through AA. I found a higher power. And I thought that those things were going to carry me through, because the whole time I refused to acknowledge myself and the issues within myself. And I refused to fight for myself. I was doing it to please other people, to get them off of my back. But one day, after my family has finally had enough, in fact, it was December 16th, 2015. Like I said, my first rehab I ever went to, I was 21. It was January of 2015. That year I went to 6 rehabs total. And I went to jail. I spent a total of about maybe 2 months free in that year. And so I get arrested for a bunch of felony theft charges on December 16th. It's 2015. And so, of course, I chose like the worst possible time to go to jail, because the courts are shut down for the holidays. So like I just sat there for weeks waiting, wondering what my fate was going to be. And while I'm in there, you know, when I was younger, throughout all this time when I'm younger, I kept going in and out of all these different churches. And there's this church in Jennings, Louisiana called Our Savior's Church. And there's a pastor there named Pastor Josh. And he took a liking to me for some reason. And I didn't understand it. You know, I was like not wanting anything to do with him or his church or what he believed in. I was just kind of going because it got my mom off my back, and as long as she was off my back, she wasn't prying in my business, and I could go do whatever I wanted. It was just kind of a means to an end. And he would not leave me alone. And he's like, I'd walk in, and he's like all the way across the sanctuary, and he's like, hey, brother, Jesus loves you. I'm like, all right, dude, like, keep that down, man. You know? And so I'm going to this church, and I meet him, and I get this Bible specifically. This Bible is a big part of my testimony, because I have a couple of them. But I got this Bible in 2014 from some family friends at that church, actually. And I did everything I could to get rid of this book. I'm going to be so honest. I've thrown this thing out. This Bible right here has survived. I have thrown it out of windows, like in moving vehicles, into ditches. Like I'll never see it again. Somehow finds its way back to my house. I have left it places. I threw it in trash cans. I did everything I thought I could do to get rid of this book, and this book found its way back to me every single time. Someone tried to steal it one time. They like scratched my name off the front. And then when I finally got it back, it was like right before Shiloh. I'm like, dude, who took my name off this Bible? I was so upset. And then like when you open it, the first page is like Aaron, and it's like a note to me. So I'm like, well, my name's in here. That was stupid. But anyway, you know, so I'm in jail, and Pastor Josh comes to visit me. Now I want to listen. You know, now I'm interested in what he has to say. And so he comes and he sits down, and he doesn't say anything. I'm just sitting there. I'm like trying to like talk him into saying something. And he sits there for like 5 minutes, and he just stares at me. And so I'm done talking. I couldn't think of words to say anymore. Like I was done talking, and he's just like, okay. He said, I'll see you when you get out then. And he just gets up and leaves, and I'm like, you didn't even say anything. Like, no Jesus loves you this time. No, like, it's going to be okay, brother. Like, none of that. Just, I'll see you when you get out. All right, cool. That's fine, man. So, like, I was salty about that. I'm not going to lie. And PJ, if you ever watch this, just know that I still love you, and I'm not salty about it anymore. But that kind of shifted something in me while I was in jail, because at the time I was an atheist, and I had just given up on everything completely. I just, like, whatever. I was either going to go to prison or die, and that was pretty much where those were like my two paths that I could take. And when I'm in jail, the day after he visits, unbeknownst to me, he brings this Bible specifically, into the jail with him to be given to me. And so once again, I'm like, I can't get rid of you, obviously. I'm like, I have nothing better to do, might as well read it now. You know, I'm in jail now. Not like there's TV, but you can't even hear it because there's no sound on the TV. It's just a picture. So no point in sitting through that. And so I started reading, and I knew some things about the Bible. You know, I knew a few things, like a few of the most famous verses, you know, John 3:16, Jeremiah 29:11. And as I start reading, I remember I started with Romans. and I made a mistake because like I was not mature enough in the things of God to understand what was being said. I was like, I do what I do not want to do, but I do what I don't want, and I do what I do want to do. And I'm like, what? And so that was like my first experience with the Bible. And so we go through the holidays, and I'm sitting in my jail cell one day, and they call me down to the courtroom, and I'm thinking like, man, they must have found something else to charge me with, because obviously there's no other reason they call me down to the courtroom. And so I go in there, and the courtroom's full of people. I sit down, and all these people like get up and walk out the courtroom. So I'm just sitting alone in the courtroom. There's not even a judge. There's not a guard. I'm just like shackled to this chair in a courtroom. Like, wait, is this what? What has happened? Like, I was so confused. And then they come and they're like, the DA's approved you to go to rehab. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, what kind of rehab, you know? So now I'm going to manipulate my way through this. I'm like, what kind of rehab? They're like, all you got to do is 30 days and they'll drop all your charges. I'm like, 30 days? I've done that a few times. That's nothing, a month. I can do that. And then I can be on my way. I can go do what I want to do. Y'all, I wanted to say yes so bad. And I said no. And I'm like, why did I say no just now? Like, it's 30 days. And I literally, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to go to somewhere that's a year long and it has to be Christian. And I'm like, shut up, Aaron. What's wrong with you? Stop talking. 30 days. And so they asked me if I knew anywhere, and I said no. And it just so happened my mom worked with someone whose brother was in Shiloh at the time. And unbeknownst to me, I figured it out later, my DA's son is actually a Shiloh graduate as well. So they knew about Shiloh. And so my mom's like, yeah, you're going to go to this place called Shiloh, and it's so awesome, and it's blah, 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 and it's in Texas. I'm like, look, one, it's not in Louisiana, and two, it's not in Louisiana, and that's all I care about. And so they come and get me, and I go to Shiloh. And I remember I was so disappointed because I was thinking like it's in Texas, and I didn't know where Liberty, Texas was. So I'm like, man, like at least like everything's gonna look different. And I get here and I'm like, literally this is Louisiana just under the name of Texas. Like there's swamps and pine trees and like nothing's different. And I'm really upset. Like I was really upset about that. You know, I wanted something different. So anyway, I get to Shiloh, and you know they bring me in the office, and I'm filling out all my paperwork, and in my head I'm like making my game plan. I'm like, all right, all you gotta do is stay here for a year. They'll drop all your charges. All you gotta do is everything they ask you to do. It won't be that hard. You faked your way through these things before. It's all good. You know, tell my mom and dad bye. Okay, cool. And then like right before I go to the dorm, they're like, hey, we're gonna pray over you. And I'm like, okay, let's do this thing. Hurry up, you know. I'm gonna go take a nap. And so four of them, there were 4 people that day, and they lay their hands on me and they start praying. And I started bawling. And I'm like, what in tarnation? And so, like, I'm bawling my eyes out, y'all. And I wasn't sad. That's why I didn't understand, because I wasn't sad about anything. I wasn't upset. In fact, I felt kind of happy. You know, it was different. It was something I'd never experienced before. If it was an emotion I had experienced, it had been so long since I had experienced it, because I had been numbing everything out for so many years, you know, and I didn't understand the concept of joy and compassion and love and kindness and gentleness anymore, because I was living in this world that was filled with hate, and you got to watch your back, and you got to do this, and this person will do this and that, blah, blah, blah. And then over here was just peace. And I'm crying, and I don't understand what's going on. So they finish praying, and like, you know, they stop praying, and they look at me, and I'm like, what was that? I don't understand why I'm crying. And they're like, dude, that's Jesus. And I'm like, what, he's real? What? So it turns out Jesus is real. I found out, if you're wondering, he's real. And so, of course, began my walk with God. And so this is kind of where things get fun and good, because there were all these people here who got to walk it with me, you know, the Shiloh staff and some of these students. And so one thing I discovered, and that's why I read Galatians 4, was we belong to God. The Bible doesn't say that we belong to the world. That's not anywhere in the book. Nowhere in the book does God get so frustrated with his sons and daughters that he's like, you know what? You just belong to the world now. I'll leave the 99 for the one except you. Like you stay over there. It doesn't say that. He says that he will go after every child. He will put things in your path where you see it not. Because when I began to look back over my life, and when I began to think about some of the things that I had survived, some of the stupid accidents that I put myself in, some of the situations I put myself in, and the fact that I made it out of them alive, obviously the only answer is that God's hand was there. And of course, later down the road, I discovered those things are because of someone like a praying mother, because I'm going to say this, so moms, this one's for y'all, but God honors every prayer that is said, but there is something about the prayer of a hurting mom, and God is just like, I am there right now. And I will never understand it. I don't really want to understand it. All I know is it worked, and that's all I need to know. But so something I discovered is that I was easily swayed. Even after I got to Shiloh, I was easily swayed in what I believed about the Bible. And a lot of different teachers come through Shiloh, from pastors, missionaries, and just all these different walks of the body. And so they all have different things to teach on, and they all have different interpretations of how they explain the Bible based off of their own experience with God, based off of how they've seen God move. And I remember there would be people would come in, and one guy would talk on this subject, and a few days later another guy would come in and he would talk on the same subject, but he taught it kind of differently. And so I'm like, well, which one's right? Who's right, who's wrong? Someone has to be right and wrong. Something I was very plugged into very on, a revelation I caught, was that this is really black and white, and there's not a lot of gray area in how we live our lives as Christians. It's pretty much black and white. You can't really falter back and forth. And at this time, Pastor Rocky brought up the word identity one day in class, and I didn't get what he meant. To me, identity meant my calling, what God had called me to do. And as I went through my time, and still to this day, as I go through my walk every day, I discover more and more the difference between the two. By the time I graduated Shiloh, I knew what my calling was, and I knew where I was going, and I kind of knew where God was taking me and the path he wanted me to go down. I just didn't know all the means yet. Those doors get revealed as time goes on, and that's the fun part. But I also left Shiloh understanding who I was. I had finally done what my mom had asked me to do. I had dug down, and for the first time in my life, when the best analogy I could think of is when I finally got in the boxing ring with the devil, instead of cowering down and letting him beat me, I actually decided I was going to fight back this time. And what I also discovered was that it wasn't really the devil, it was myself. And so I battled all these things in myself, and that's kind of the beauty of Shiloh. I want to brag on Shiloh for a second. That's kind of the beauty of Shiloh, is that a lot of people want to go there, and they would love to get the Bible classes those men get, and a lot of the things those men get, because I will tell you, I learned so much about the Bible in my 1 year as a student, and I was blessed enough to get to spend another year there as a staff member, and I learned so much more through that, and just getting to grow with those guys. But the real battle that is Shiloh, and the real breakthrough and the real refining, doesn't happen from any of the staff, and it doesn't happen from the teachers that come in, and it doesn't happen here. It's when those men are in their dorm, and it's just them. That is where it happens, because that is where what I was talking about in the beginning comes into the play. The fact that everyone has a different personality. Everyone has different quirks. None of these men are the same. But the biggest thing is that when you go into this place, you suddenly realize you're looking not just in one mirror, but you're looking in 20 other mirrors, because everyone is just like you on the basis level. You're selfish, you're greedy, you're prideful, you don't know what love and compassion is. There's all these things. And that's kind of the beauty that is them refining each other, is that they discover those things themselves through themselves. It's nothing that can be taught. It can only be discovered. I can sit here and pound scripture at y'all all day, but until you actually go out and act on the love of Christ, and you act out in compassion, and you act out in gentleness and kindness and faithfulness and self-control and all those other fruits of the Spirit, you'll never understand them. And all that is rooted in knowing your identity and knowing that you have been called a son or a daughter. Jesus Christ is hanging on a cross. It's 33 AD, and Jesus Christ is hanging on a cross on Calvary Hill. And all he's probably thinking about has nothing to do with the amount of pain he's in. It has nothing to do with the fact that his disciples ran away from him. In fact, he pretty much voices his thought about it all in one statement when he says, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And Jesus is saying, forgive them, they don't understand yet, they don't know who they are yet, and they're about to figure it out because I'm about to come out and pour this Spirit over the land. And when that comes and they catch that revelation, it's the same thing as when Peter got the revelation of who Jesus was. That's not just something that Peter got and then he just kind of walked on by himself. That changed Peter's life. To be walking with a guy, say I'm just walking up here with a guy and then suddenly I'm like, oh my God, you're the Son of God. That's not just gonna affect me for 5 minutes. That's gonna affect me for 50 years. That's the Son of God. It'd be like if, I don't know why I was gonna say Tony Romo, but he'd probably get stoned if he walked in here. Never mind. I won't use that name. That's a poor excuse. Anyway, I understood I was a son, and Peter says in 1 Peter 2:9, he says that we are part of a royal priesthood. When you go through the Bible, your identity is written from the very beginning to the very end. And there are so many things about who you are that are written, but for some reason we refuse to believe them. We walk around and we go, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And then we see one picture on Facebook or Instagram. We're like, man, I'm so ugly and I'm this and that. No. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. It's not a negotiation. It's not some kind of maybe I am, maybe I'm not. No, either you believe it or you don't. There's no in between. Look, y'all, I used to work out twice a day, 5 or 6 days a week. I was so consumed with the idea of this worldly identity and how I had to look as a 24-year-old male. And I did all those things and I got the muscles and I did all that. And then when I got there, I was like, cool. That was a lot of time that I could have spent doing something else, And now I'm here and my life hasn't changed drastically like that commercial for the Bowflex said, and I'm really upset. And I don't really know what to do now. But that's the thing. There's these little tests that were put in front of me all throughout the beginning of my walk, and I didn't even realize it until I graduated Shiloh. Hey, Corey, will you stand up? Y'all give that man some applause real quick. That is the man that helped to mold me into who I am. And he didn't do it through tender love and kind words. He was when I worked at Shiloh, I would walk in the office in the mornings and I'd be in a bad mood and he'd just be smiling. I'm like, what are you smiling at? He's like, you're miserable, I love it. I'm like, man, awesome, cool. But Corey, the reason I bring him up, Corey was the one who issued 95% of my disciplines at Shiloh when I would get written up for doing stupid things and breaking the rules. And every time, he would just have this huge smile on his face, he enjoys it. He enjoys watching you sign that paper, saying you're about to do dishes by yourself for 30 men for 3 days, oh, I can't wait. But it wasn't until after I graduated and I worked there that I understood why he smiled every time. Because he knew, see, to me, I'm just signing a piece of paper, and now for the next 3 days, I can't go work out because I got to do dishes. And that really bums me out. What he sees is the next stronghold being torn down. And I didn't understand it at the time. What he saw was authority issues being torn down. And what he saw was someone beginning to understand that discipline is love. And what he saw were all these different things. And every time the lesson was different. Same discipline. Don't get me wrong, same discipline. But every time the lesson was different. And through those things, as I began to understand who I was in Christ and that I was a son, I began to be able to proclaim things, and watch them come to fruition in God's timing. I'm not going to say that I just spoke and it happened, because otherwise I wouldn't be driving that Corolla I drive. I can promise you that. But God's good. Anyway, so I graduated Shiloh and I went home for court. At this point, I still didn't know that my DA son is a Shiloh graduate. I had no clue. And so I go to my court date and they call me up there. And I'm like, okay, here we go. So they read off my charges and they're like, felony, blah, 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 misdemeanor. And I'm like, man, that sounds really bad. This is really bad. This is not going to end well. See, I'm speaking that. And I didn't realize I was speaking that. And so the judge is like, all right, well, we're going to charge you with 3 felonies. So I'm like, cool. I did a whole year for nothing. I did that whole year at Shiloh, completely changed my life. Like, literally gave my all to that program, didn't fake my way through it, and I got nothing for it. The DA stands up. And then now I'm like, oh God, I'm in trouble. Crud. And he stands up and he's talking to the judge and he's like, look, he said, I understand. He's like, I'm looking at his charges, and he said, I understand those things. He said, but my son graduated Shiloh Ministries, and I will guarantee that this young man is not the same young man that stood here a year ago when you pressed these charges on him. The judge looks at me and goes, fine, we'll drop all 3 felonies, keep the misdemeanor, seeing you in September. And I'm like, yeah! I like contained myself in the courtroom so I didn't get kicked out. and all I can think is like, he understood what his son had become. He understood that it wasn't just some AA thing. He understood that his son wasn't walking around saying, I'm a recovering addict. No, I was an addict. I'm not anymore. That's not who I am. Now I'm a son. Now I'm part of a royal priesthood. Now I have a calling and I have a purpose and I have things I have to go forward and I have to do. And I'm always reminded of when Paul said, I forget about the things behind me and I keep my eyes set forward on the goal that's in Christ Jesus. It's real easy to lose our identity in everyone else's identity. Because I play music, I play guitar, I play drums, I play all these instruments. And one thing I had to remind myself after I got saved was, I'm not Jimi Hendrix, I'm not Eddie Van Halen, I'm not Neil Peart, I'm not Keith Moon, I'm not John Bonham or Jimmy Page. I'm none of those musicians. God didn't design me to be them. He designed me to be Aaron. And when I began to get to do worship teams, and I started playing in here, and I play in the youth band as well, usually, obviously not today. This is a hologram. But, when I don't do it for me, I realize, the love that I used to have for music comes back now when I'm not doing it for me. Because when I do it for God, it doesn't matter how complicated what I'm playing is. It can be the simplest beat, the simplest chord structure ever. But when I'm doing it for God, it's enjoyable because I'm doing what I was created to do and I'm walking in what He has given me. And yeah, selfishness and obedience are 2 different things, and we have to remember that. So one of the last things I want to say is as I go through all this and I go through my year of working at Shiloh, and the time comes for me to move on from Shiloh, and God tells me I'm moving on, and I'm like, all right, where am I going, God? And He's like, you're just leaving. All right. So that's what I did. I went to pastor and sister, told them what God had told me, and this is the day I'm going, and I left. And at that time was kind of when these switches were going around with Buck becoming youth pastor, and a few weeks before that, I left Shiloh. Buck had asked me if I was interested in joining the youth band. I was like, I'll think about it. I'd been wanting to go out to youth, but they needed a drummer in here, and I was like, I'm the only drummer around right now, and so, I'm kind of obligated to be in here, and some things, once again, God, man. And so I leave Shiloh, and one day I'm driving around, and I'm job hunting, and Buck texted me, and he was like, hey, did you think about what I asked you about? So it just so happened I'm driving by the church at the time. So I was like, well, I'll just pull in and talk to him. Well, it just so happens Buck's literally standing outside when I pull up. So I'm like, all right, that's all right. I see you, God. So I get out my car and I'm talking to Buck and I'm like, yeah, dude, I'd love to do it. And Pastor Mark comes walking out, and before he knew my name, he always called me Drummer the Overcomer. That was my nickname. So he's like, oh, Drummer the Overcomer. Well, he's talking to me and he asked me what's going on. And I kind of told him, God told me to leave Shiloh. I'm just kind of job hunting. He's like, you're looking for a job? And I was like, yes, sir. He goes, all right. I'm like, oh boy. So he tells me to get in the car with him and go to Anahuac. So I'm like, oh man. Like literally this was the best job interview I ever had, was working for Maranatha, because it's like done on the way to the ranch, and it's just he's just asking me these questions, and outside of reading them off of a piece of paper, it was so weird because some of the questions are real personal, and I'm like, I don't really want to tell you that while it's just us in like a car going down the road. It's just the vibe's weird, Anyway, I started working here in January. We talked about it today, actually. I started working here in January. And throughout my time here, there are other things about my identity that have been put to the test that couldn't be tested at Shiloh because the proper means weren't there. One thing is the fact that I didn't really have a servant's heart. I would do what you asked me to do, and I would do it. But like to go out of my way to do something for someone was too much for me. Like Lord forbid I go help this person. I'm 24 and I work out, and here's this like little old lady struggling to like move this thing, and I'm like, yeah, but that's out of my way. Like, God, yeah, I know. God, let me finish the story. Hold on. And so I started working here, and I had to understand that it was no longer about me. I also worked with Sister Dincy for a while at her school, teaching guitar and drums, and I learned a lot through that. I learned a lot about how innocent children really are and how important it is to keep them that way. Because, I was teaching like little 7 or 8-year-olds, and I am not a child person, like at all. Like, don't ever ask me to babysit. Teenagers I can handle. You can be a bit rougher with them. Kids, not my ball game. And so I'm teaching these little kids, just some of the things that they talk about, like just some of the things they find funny, or like what is common conversation to them. It reminded me of being little and like talking with my grandmother, just making small talk. And like it was funny. It was like, kids say some weird things, man. Like they really do. Or like they don't understand what they're saying, so it makes it even funnier. And I'm like, oh God. But it was funny, but it was this huge revelation to me because it reminded me of when I was a kid, and it reminded me of a time before my life just like spiraled out of control. And then I found Jesus, and he helped me latch back onto it, which was really awesome. But I always sometimes like to remember what it was like before, the kid I was before I got so scared of the world, and I had to hide behind all these substances and these people and these personas, and I had to have the right clothes, and I had to have the right hair and all these things, and and so with that being said, I want to do something. I just want to do something. I'm going to ask some of you Shiloh guys to come up here. Come on. This is a participation. Come on. Y'all just line up around the front of the altar. Y'all just stand up over there. Make yourself available. We're going to have you guys pray for some people. Ready in season and out. So what I want to do here is that, kind of like Pastor Mark says, there's a few different things. One is that you might not have known who Jesus was at all. You might have came in here like me, an atheist. I'll see what this is about, but probably not. But maybe you want to meet him. Maybe something I said, maybe one of the words that were spoken during worship kind of touched your heart, and you felt that tug. Because let me tell you, what that tug is Jesus, and he's pulling you to him, it's time to stop running. And so if you don't know Jesus, that's the first thing that we want to pray with you about. The second thing being that all these men are overcomers. You know, they're more than just men in Shiloh. They're overcomers and they're warriors for the kingdom. And they've overcome something very specific. Not addiction, but themselves. And so if you have a loved one, if you have a friend, a family member, someone you know, a coworker, whatever it is, who is struggling with some form of addiction, it doesn't have to be just drugs or alcohol, gambling, pornography, sex, those are all addictions. Those are real things that exist in this world. If you have someone that you know who is addicted to one of those things, or if you are one of those people, I would ask that you would get up here and come pray with one of these men and allow them to bless you with the anointing that's been poured out over their lives. So I would ask y'all to come forward if that's y'all.
You can connect with us at Maranatha Church on social media. How? I'll show you. For the most complete information, you can go to our webpage at maranathachurch.com. You can also find us on Facebook by searching Maranatha Church of Mont Bellevue. Like our page. You can follow Pastor Mark on Twitter at Pastor Mark Trice. And on Instagram, we're MC Mont Bellevue. With just a few clicks and swipes, you can find out whatever you need to know about your church. Don't miss out. Connect with us today.